the previous chapter of the Tristan Code, we saw how Tristan was able to prove that he vanquished the dragon by his possession of the dragon's tongue. Gottfried von Strasberg's story contains several other episodes wherein such an object provides proof of a fact or a set of circumstances. Earlier in the tale, Tristan's true parentage, and therefore his position as heir to his uncle's throne, is established by a ring presented by his stepfather, Rual, given to him by Tristan's mother on her deathbed. When Tristan slays the champion knight Morold, he sends the severed head back to Ireland as proof. But unknown to him, this rather gross confirmation contains a much smaller object of evidence. A shard of steel broken from Tristan's blade, which Isolde is later able to match up to the notch left in his sword, a physical verification that almost leads to Tristan's death. In the story of Tristan and Isolde, objects serve to confirm circumstances. But in this installment of the Tristan Code, we'll see how Richard Wagner reversed this procedure, relying on circumstances to verify an object he knew we needed to acquire. The object in question is seen here in facsimile. The original is unknown to me. My first and only exposure to a reproduction of this document was on page 93 of the book The Tragic and the Ecstatic by Eric Chafe. I have every reason to believe that his reproduction is accurate. The author also includes a brief discussion of the circumstances of its preservation. This rather strange exercise is known to the archivists as the harmony lesson, and there's no reason we couldn't call it that as well, though the harmonic tutorial it contains is just one of the lessons we'll take from it. It is, in fact, our Diederik, our skeleton key. It is our key to the castle, the most vital document, apart from the score itself, in the Tristan Code. And Wagner went to great, almost unimaginable lengths to ensure that we would obtain it and would recognize its purpose. But for his efforts, Wagner has some requirements of us. In addition to, as always, the story of Tristan and Isolde, there are two other stories, both verifiably true, that he expects us to be familiar with. The first of these has a somewhat Tristan-esque flavor, as in it, an object is produced as proof of a sort of accomplishment. It is the admittedly tall tale of a young man, and one of the giants of music. The story begins in Vienna in 1822. A young musician from Darmstadt named Louis Schlesser was spending a year of study in this city of music. In this time he had become acquainted with many of Vienna's finest musicians, but there was one man among them who he hadn't met, and that he wanted to meet most of all, his musical idol, Ludwig van Beethoven. Now, there were some special difficulties for someone who wanted to meet Beethoven. And first among these was, in accord with the customs of that day, the need for a third-party introduction. Beethoven's reputation was that of a man quick to anger, and it was well known that callers to his residence were likely to encounter an inhospitality that could range from rudeness to violence. One simply did not call on Beethoven, let alone to introduce him to a stranger. One evening in November of 1822, young Louis attended a performance at the Vienna Opera House. He was standing in the lobby afterwards when none other than Franz Schubert drew his attention to a group of men leaving the building, among whom was Beethoven. The starstruck young man simply couldn't let such an opportunity pass, and he followed the men out and through the darkened streets of the city at a distance until they arrived at Beethoven's home. This tantalizing sighting of the great man was followed a few months later by the introduction he had long been waiting for. A certain nobleman had some business to conduct with Beethoven, and this errand was entrusted to the eager young musician from Darmstadt. At this point, the story becomes somewhat marvelous. Young Louis claimed that he was welcomed by Beethoven with open arms. He said they had a pleasant discussion about music, that he even showed Beethoven some compositions of his own, and that the composer thought they were quite good, if a trifle complicated. But here the tale of his encounter with Beethoven begins to border on the fanciful. for Schlesser claimed that this notoriously unsocial composer repaid the visit, calling on him at his own lodgings. He further claimed they met again several times, both in Vienna and in Baden, indicating that they'd become fast friends. We can't be certain how Louis Schlesser's contemporaries received his account of his friendship with Beethoven. Modern scholars have all but discounted the particulars of Schlesser's recollections, but it's doubtful that he would have cared. Louis Schlesser knew Beethoven, spent time with him, and had a cordial relationship with the man, and if challenged, he could prove it, then and now. Most significantly, Beethoven gave him a piece of music, written out in Louis's own workbook, a short canon for voices, Edelseiter Mensch, now known to us as work without opus 185. And along with this music manuscript, and a letter of introduction to his highly respected colleague Luigi Cherubini, Beethoven gave the departing Louis this farewell note. "A happy journey, my dear Herr Schlesser. May all things which seem desirable come to meet you. Your devoted Beethoven." Louis Schlesser, who went on to become a well-known composer and conductor, had indisputable proof of the circumstances of his youthful acquaintance with Beethoven in the giant's own hand. The second story we must know is a brief but well-documented episode in Wagner's own life. And here our two rules will be put to perhaps their most strenuous test. For Wagner's behavior on this occasion has without exception been deemed absolutely senseless. Yet, by simply knowing the details of the story of Tristan and Isolde, we'll find the method and the message behind Wagner's madness. Richard Wagner finished Tristan und Isolde in August of 1859, and a short time later he relocated to Paris with the intention of arranging for performances there of his earlier works. Among his Parisian acquaintances at the time was a journalist named Auguste de Gasparini, a great admirer of Wagner's music. De Gasparini helped arrange an audition for the composer with Léon Carvalho, the director of the Théâtre Lyrique, one of Europe's most prestigious opera houses. The work to be demonstrated was Wagner's Tannhäuser. We can be fairly sure of the specifics of Wagner's actions on the occasion of his audition because both de Gasparini and Carvalho left written accounts, although whether this is due to our good fortune or Wagner's meticulous planning must remain a matter of speculation. Carvalho had arranged for 2 pianos to be made available, and probably assumed the composer to perhaps arrive with a few singers, but Wagner showed up alone. Carvalho noted that Wagner wore a sort of outfit, a blue jacket with a red braid, and a yellow Greek cap adorned with a green fringe. The composer sat down at one of the pianos, opened his score, and began to play and sing, and neither gentleman was in the least prepared for the spectacle they were about to witness. De Gasparini was appalled at Wagner's performance. He wrote that the composer shouted, he threw himself about, he played the piano with his wrists, his elbows, he smashed the pedals, he ground the keys. Carvalho recalled that Wagner howled, he flung himself about, he hit all sorts of wrong notes, and on top of that, he sang in German. Suddenly, Wagner arose, excused himself, and left the room. The 2 witnesses were left in bewilderment until Wagner returned a short while later. He wore an identical outfit, but the colors had all changed. Now he wore a yellow coat with blue braid and a red cap with yellow fringe. He sat back down and continued his maniacal performance as before. Carvalho confessed to a great unease. He was especially alarmed by Wagner's eyes. "The eyes of a madman," he wrote. "I dared not to cross him. He frightened me." De Gasparini recalled that when the last page was finally reached, Carvalho stammered a few polite words, turned on his heels, and disappeared. Needless to say, Tannhäuser was not performed at the Théâtre Lyrique. While several of the more popular biographies of Wagner have alluded to this incident in more or less detail, none have ever proffered any explanation for Wagner's actions that day, nor even implied that there may have been a purpose behind his bizarre behavior. But we need look no further than Gottfried von Strasberg's Tristan, for on that day in Leon Carvalho's office, Wagner was playing a role for us, depicting in great detail a character in the tale that would have been quite ungainly to have included in his music drama. This character is the magic dog Pettigrew from Avalon, the land of fairies. The story tells us that Tristan acquired Pettigrew from a man named Gillen in order to send it as a gift to Isolde at a time that they'd been forced apart. Around Pettigrew's neck hangs a bell, and the tone of the bell is so pure and soothing as to bring instant relief from all sorrow to all who hear it. But when Isolde receives Tristan's gift, the very relief she experiences, but is unable to share with Tristan, only makes her miss him all the more, causing her ever more distress until she finally cuts off the bell and silences Pettigrew forever. However, there's more to this magic dog than his beautiful sound. Pettigrew is a colorful creature, many-colored. I'll let Gottfried describe him in the translation of Thomas Stavenhagen. The loins greener than clover, one side redder than scarlet, the other yellower than saffron, the underside like blue sapphire. But Pettigrew is more than multicolored. He also changes color, even as you look at him, until it becomes difficult to say just what color or colors he is. Then it was not green or red, nor white, nor black, nor yellow, or blue, and yet some shade of each was there. Richard Wagner didn't include Pettigrew in his Tristan und Isolde, but that day in Leon Carvalho's office, he became Pettigrew, a reenactment in costume of the appropriate hues, and including a mid-show color change. And as Pettigrew ultimately failed to soothe Isolde of her sorrows, so too did he fail to bring the expected joy to the director of the Théâtre Lyrique. By so bombastically invoking the Pettigrew episode, Wagner has in fact given us 4 very important pieces of information, 4 clues. Firstly, he's informing us that the secrets of the Tristan Code have not ended with the completion of the score, from which we must assume that there are things we need that lie outside of the work itself. He's also telling us in the most extreme manner possible that his activities in Paris deserve our attention. Thirdly, he's brazenly admitting that he's willing to use the people around him in unwitting service to his covert agenda. For the 4th clue, Wagner expects us to simply fill in some details of the story. You see, in order to acquire Pettigrew from his owner, Gillen, Tristan had to perform a service for him. Gillen had an enemy, a giant named Ergen. Tristan, ever the willing assassin, killed Ergen, and in order to prove his accomplishment, he presented Gillen with the giant's severed right hand. With the most extraordinary vigor, Wagner has meshed the Pettigrew episode into the Tristan Code. Therefore, somewhere in Paris, there must be a man with the giant's hand. In 1860, in Paris, Louis Schlesser, the man with the giant's hand, met with Richard Wagner. And as a memento of the occasion, Wagner, like Beethoven before him, gave him a sheet of music paper. On one side, in ink and in Wagner's distinctive hand, was the orchestral sketch to the so-called concert ending to the prelude to Tristan und Isolde. At the top of the other side, also in ink, was an earlier working out of the same music. But on the bottom of the sheet, in pencil, and in an unrecognized handwriting, is the harmony lesson, our skeleton key, our Diederik, our key to the castle, entrusted to a man who had proven he could hold on to a giant's hand. Neither Louis Schlesser nor anyone since has realized the immense significance of this document, now preserved in the Austrian National Library, but Wagner could be confident we would. For the first step in solving the Tristan Code was to understand that Gottfried von Strassburg's acrostic encryption of Diederik isn't a name, but a word, the word for skeleton key. Wagner knew that if we knew that, we'd recognize our Diederik, despite its unfamiliar handwriting. The keeper's last name, Schlesser, tells it all. In German, the word Schlesser means castles. And the word Schlosser, a more common name, means locksmith. Richard Wagner, quite wisely, gave our key to the castle to the locksmith of the castle. The harmony lesson is above all a lesson of lessons. It teaches us how to learn, and the first lesson is visible at a glance. The 16 chords written out in musical notation are accompanied by 16 notes that are represented only by their letter names. This tells us that sometimes we can learn more by taking the notes away from the music. And in the next installment of the Tristan Code, this lesson will begin to bear fruit. We'll also see that our number sequence, the Tristan chord, and Gottfried von Strassburg's Tristan have some surprising commonalities. And when we're done, we'll know the Tristan chord forwards and backwards.